Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 26th Williston Basin Petroleum Conference. We are excited to welcome you to the city of Bismarck, North Dakota for what is going to be a great week. My name is Kathy Neset, and I'm chairman of the North Dakota Petroleum Council. The past year has been one for the record books. The COVID-19 pandemic started shutting down the Bakken in March of 2020 and led to two postponements of this very petroleum conference. So today, we celebrate. We're celebrating being able to meet in person, share the valuable information our presenters will share with you for the next 2 days. We are thrilled to bring many great speakers, and this week we are going to share the latest technologies, research, and techniques that will take the Bakken to the next level and also to Bakken now. It's now my pleasure to introduce our first session chair to get that session underway. Brent Sanford was sworn in as North Dakota's 38th Lieutenant Governor on December 15th, 2016. As Lieutenant Governor, Brent serves as President of the North Dakota Senate, leads the state's highly successful trade office, and chairs the North Dakota State Investment Board, as well as several other boards, commissions, and authorities. Before becoming Lieutenant Governor, Brent served as mayor of his hometown, Watford City, for 4 years. Please join me in welcoming Lieutenant Governor Brent Sanford.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy, for that introduction. Welcome all of you to Bismarck and the Williston Basin Petroleum Conference. Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to see all of you here and be here in person after the year we've gone through. So thank you again. One of the big questions today is what can the state of North Dakota do to support our great energy industry and the development of our natural resources to the benefit of all of our citizens? Navigating through the forces attempting to reduce fossil fuels production politically and globally is a difficult task. However, the legislators of North Dakota always seek to lead the world when they come to Bismarck, as they did in the creation of the North Dakota Clean Sustainable Energy Authority under House Bill 1452. With me today are Senator Jessica Bell, Senator Dale Patten, Representative Todd Porter, Representative Glen Bosch, and Representative Mike Nathe to educate us on actions by the 67th Legislative Assembly, which just adjourned, by the way, to support and enhance energy development in our state. Senator Bell has served as state senator for District 33 in Coal Country since 2012. Jessica has held the chairmanship for both the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee as well as the Finance and Tax Committee, leading both state energy and tax policies. Senator Dale Patten is presently serving his first term and second session in the North Dakota Legislature as the senator for District 39, my home district from Watford City. This district goes from McKenzie County all the way to Bowman County, so it covers a lot of the Bakken. His committees this session are Finance and Tax Committee and the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. Representative Todd Porter has been a member of the House of Representatives serving District 34 since 1999, representing Mandan. He was 17 when he started. Todd has served as chairman of the House Energy and Natural Resources Committee since 2007. Elected to the North Dakota House of Representatives in 2016, Glen Bosch represents Bismarck's District 30, South Bismarck, and serves on the Finance and Taxation and Energy and Natural Resources Committees. He is also the current Majority Caucus chairman. Representative Mike Nathe has served District 30 as well, also South Bismarck in the House since 2008. He currently is a member of the House Appropriations Committee and sits on the Energy and Environment section. Please join me in welcoming Senators Bell and Patten and Representatives Porter, Bosch, and Nathe. All right, with that, I'll take a seat with them. We're going to have a panel discussing some of the important energy legislation. And the title of our panel is Clean Sustainable Energy Authority. So With that, the prime sponsor, Representative Bosch, if you could explain 1452 and what the Clean Sustainable Energy Authority means to you and to our state, that would be a great way to get it rolling. Thank you, Glen.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I think, for me, House Bill 1452 is really a game changer. And I think what it's about, we're talking about opportunities, and it's an opportunity for our state to be considered one of the world leaders in the development of technology centered around low emissions. And when we were talking about the bill, we felt like we needed to have a strategy to move us forward in taking a look at some opportunities that were in front line. We really were missing a spot where technologies were ready to be commercialized, and we wanted to be able to focus this bill on opportunities that were ready to be commercialized, because I think as a state, we realized that if we could commercialize the projects here in North Dakota, that was really where the state would win. And so we put the framework together. We took the good work from the research councils, and we moved forward with that. Then I think some of the other important things was we wanted to define what clean and sustainable was for the state of North Dakota and what it meant for our energy producers. We wanted to be able to define what that meant, and I think we did a good job putting language around that so it supported what our technology and our energy producers wanted to have for definitions. After that, we really wanted to look at how the state could act as partners with our energy innovators, and we looked at funding opportunities. We were able to put together a package that gave us a $25 million appropriation out of the general fund, and with ongoing $30 million language to add to it every year. I think what's important, though, is that we want to be leaders in the area of low-emission technologies. We want to have things defined. We want to be able to put our technology partners and our energy partners first, and we want to be able to have the benefit of being the first to commercialize some of these new technologies.
Thank you, Glen. And what you noticed during the session was Glen's business acumen, his ability to get along with his peers, being caucus leader really helped to push this thing through. It was not popular at certain points based on groups that felt like they were left out. But there are also some important attributes to this bill, and a couple of them I'd like to have Representative Porter go through. And when Representative Porter visits about this, he takes us back to that 1999, but then a little bit sooner. But he brings us back to when the state energy policy was put in place, and also the Empower Commission. So if you could touch on those two issues, Todd, I'd appreciate that.
Sure. It's funny when you do something that's a home run. Everybody wants to be in it and involved in it. When we did the Empower Commission, we did it with a very specific purpose in mind on how to move energy and value-added energy forward. And what we found was that everybody, every single lobbying group wanted to be part of it. And that was no different with 1452, with this bill. When you sit in the chairman's position in a committee, it really doesn't give you anything special other than you're tasked with making sure everything stays on time. When Glen came forward with this bill, some said, well, maybe Glen doesn't know enough about energy to do this. I would tell you that he knew everything about energy and how to make a good policy to be forward-looking for the entire state of North Dakota. When we did the 25 by 25 legislation, I just have to guess that it was in the 05 or 07 session. It was the up-and-coming thing was, how do we get a diversified portfolio of energy production? And when we looked at that during this session, it was amazing. It's 2021, and we've already surpassed our 25 by 25 goal. So we retooled. That's how nimble the state of North Dakota can be. We retooled ourselves and said, all right, the world changed, the demand has changed, what people want has changed, so we're going to change. And we retooled that section of code into low emission technology to work on giving people exactly what they want. When they want to turn on a light switch, they want the light switch to turn on. A lot of people don't care where it comes from. When they turn their oven on, they want a flame to run their natural gas. When they turn on their water, they want hot water. When they go to the gas pump, they want gas. But when they get into very specifics on the marketing side of things, we want to be able to take all aspects of all energy and get it to the individuals that want it for end product use. And for us as citizen legislators in careers that really aren't specialized inside of energy for the most part, I think Senator Bell is the only one up here that really has an energy background. We all had to learn the old-fashioned way on the job, and we had to dig in. We had to rely on all of you folks, all of your professional associations and individuals that knew what was the best path for your industry to move us forward. And so thank you for sending the best of the best up there to help us do the right thing, not only for your industry, but for the entire state of North Dakota.
Thank you, Representative Porter. So Todd helped us see the vision. We changed the state's energy policy from 25 by 25 to now it's officially a low emission technology is in commercialization, as Representative Bosch touched on. But also we had to take the Empower Commission, which is a group of 15 or 20 or so officials from the various different all the above energy sources and producers in the state, and move that from an advisory group with the Commerce Department over with the Clean Sustainable Energy Authority under the North Dakota Industrial Commission. So there was some restructuring so that we're all on the same page under this Clean Sustainable Energy Authority for springboarding ourselves into the future of clean, sustainable energy development in the future. But Senator Bell has also already been mentioned a couple times as being deep in knowledge in this case. If you could help us wrap in the other piece, which is really taking the research councils and all the great work done over the years and bringing that to commercialization, the fruits of their labors to commercialization and how it rolls up into this plan. If you could shed some light on that, that'd be great.
Well, thank you, Lieutenant Governor Sanford. I think any successful state who wants to attract successful businesses has to develop a comprehensive policy approach. And it doesn't matter the arena for us. We're talking about energy up here today, as you heard from our committees. A lot of us focus on energy and tax policy. And I think using those policies in a comprehensive way to attract all of your businesses to do work in our state is important. The atmosphere that we all operate in today is a volatile one. We've seen so much in the last year with the pandemic. And we've seen a lot of volatility just in the oil and gas industry alone since it's been attracted to our state decades ago, and then of course a decade ago with a really big boom. We've done our best to grow with that, and lessons that we've learned along the way, as Representative Porter talked about, is that we have to be nimble and we have to adjust. And so as we took a look at that comprehensive policy this session, as you can see with colleagues like this who know and understand the industry and energy so well, it's an easy thing for us to be able to do, to have so many different moving pieces that are all moving in the same direction. One of the big pieces that ties into the Clean Sustainable Energy Authority are our policies on ESG. You'll hear more about those a little bit later with some of the other speakers here today, so I'm not going to take a deep dive, but we took a hard look at where we want to be as a state regarding our ESG policy, and we'll continue to focus on that through the Clean Sustainable Energy Authority. In that authority, we've got partnerships with government and industry to be able to help catapult us to continue to be a global leader in the development of oil and gas and the development of low emissions technologies. We have everything here that we need to be able to do that with the EERC, with a forward-thinking Republican-led legislature, and the investment of all of you in the state of North Dakota. Doing that with, of course, I have to put a pitch in for base load, reliable electricity, something that all of us need to be able to move our businesses forward, I think creates the perfect story of success that we will be able to continue to tell over and over again.
Thank you, Senator Bell. With our state being one of the few, if not the only, that have primacy over regulation of our CO2 and our injection wells here in the state, we're looking to create a CO2 economy. And so that's where you see the lignite industry and the baseload power moving towards carbon capture, and the oil and gas industry in our state still in the infancy of that EOR. You know, how are these industries going to work together? And the Empower Commission wasn't enough. So we see these oil and gas research councils and lignite research council and the Renewable Research Council coming together under Clean Sustainable Energy Authority to have one conversation at one oversight board. And so before we jump into the money man, the appropriator, Mike Nathe, let's go to Senator Patten, because Senator Patten's experience includes being a county commissioner in the middle of the Bakken when there was a young mayor up there as well in the middle of the Bakken. And he's a political mentor of mine, but he's a very wise man, as you'll see. I called him the oldest rookie last session, but he smiles, but he doesn't like that very well. But Senator Patten got very involved with finance and tax and with natural resources this last session and became the solution person and the peacemaker on finding some solutions for things that really end up irritating for folks in this room, as they do with royalty owners, with lease royalty squabbles, with penalty and interest to the land board, where that ends up irritating between state elected officials that are on the land board and the industry as well, and so end up in some of those solution bills, as well as Pore Space 2065. But the one that we're excited about today to talk about is something that could see more action. We already have some action, but I forget the bill number, but it's the flaring mitigation technology bill. Senator Patten, if you could bring that up. And that could be a type of technology, something moving forward that helps us in our regulation, or the innovation over regulation mantra that Governor Burgum always brings. You'll hear a lot of that in the morning. But that kind of technology could come into the Clean Sustainable Energy Authority as a solution for a lot of us in the room, but also to the investment world that we're going to talk about next with Representative Nathe. So Senator Patten, if you could get into that topic, that would be helpful.
Yeah. Fortunately, I do remember the bill number, Brent. It was 2328, flare mitigation bill. This bill, I call it like a precursor bill to some of the opportunities that potentially we could see in the future. The bill was pretty basic. It gives a $6,000 per month tax credit for up to 12 months, or $72,000 for those wells that are, I call them pipeline stranded. In other words, there's no gas pipeline to provide takeaway from the well location to a gas plant. And what it does is they have a few different technologies that are out there where they can go on site. In one case, they bring server farms in shipping containers, and they locate them right there on site, run the raw gas through a generator, provide the electricity to run these server farms. The other one, same concept. They use the electrical generation from the gas to run the well location, to provide electricity for the well. In both these cases, what they're doing is they're taking gas that typically would have been flared because there's no pipeline takeaway capacity for the well, and gives a tax credit to bring these on site to capture the gas. Now, when you do that, then you obviously reduce the flaring, which is a key component, but you create another industry as well. And when we look at the tax credit that we're offering on this credit now applies to gas that is being used, but would not have generated any tax if it had been flared. So, but we still have a new industry. And when I look at that new industry, this, like I said, a precursor bill for what our new opportunities are, where we can use our energy locally to convert, in the case of natural gas, to convert it to data processing, where it's shipped through the cloud, to use it for electrical generation that's used locally. And in this case, you don't need to have a pipeline into a different market to be able to access that energy. You need a satellite dish to ship to the cloud, and there's no end right now that we could see to the demand for server farms and data processing. Yeah, the sky's the limit with all the Amazons and Googles and everything like that. They're looking for opportunities to access energy, to manage that data as they go forward. And those are things that we can do in North Dakota. So when I say this bill, very simple bill, provided a tax credit, but I think the industries that could be developed on it as we go forward are huge. And I think the scope of what we can do here and create new opportunities and new industries, and it would apply both to coal, it'll apply to our oil and gas sector, and potentially to our biofuel sector.
Thank you, Senator Patten. It brings up a couple of good points. And moving into our next speaker, Representative Nathe, we've got one member from Appropriations. The rest of these folks are Natural Resource, Finance, Tax. But Representative Nathe's on Appropriations and was involved in a couple of great bills that I tease him that him and I worked in these bills and people didn't notice because it was so noisy during COVID for all the COVID anxiety bills. But we're really moving the ball forward with House Bill 1425, which takes our sovereign wealth fund from oil and gas taxes, which is now over $8 billion, and provides cover, I would say, for, I also chair the State Investment Board, which invests those dollars. And so we have a long-running little feud there on if we did our job or not. But now we have cover from 1425, is how I say it, to invest up to 10% of those legacy fund dollars in state from an equity standpoint, and another 10% from a fixed income standpoint. And so a lot of these opportunities we've already touched on might become a type of entrepreneur or investor that comes to the state for a sovereign wealth investment in that opportunity. So Representative Nathe, if you could give us a little background on 1425, that'd be great.
Thank you, Brent. So 1425 is really a fairly simple bill that it's going to have a major impact on this state and really on the availability of capital for the state. Basically, as the Lieutenant Governor said, what this bill does is direct the State Investment Board to take 20% of the money that is invested from the oil revenue, state share of oil revenue, that you all here have had a lot to do with in giving, to put it into in-state products. And as Brent said, 10% of it will go into infrastructure-type programs. The other 10% goes into equity. And the equity piece is what has everybody pretty excited these days. North Dakota is routinely one of the lowest, if not the lowest, with available capital in this country, almost zero. And what this bill will do is make this money available to capital markets and help build out our infrastructure, not only out here, out in the west, but the rest of the state. So as you all know, when the oil and gas industry is under attack right now as far as numerous different things, and one of them is trying to find capital to run your companies and your businesses and such. So what this bill will do is make that money available, another avenue for the oil and gas industry to go after and see if they can get it or see if they qualify. In order to be qualified for it, they would have to go through a vetting process and be approved by them, by the financial managers. State Investment Board would then award the money, and the state would then take a stake in there and then invest in it, obviously with a return coming back to the state. It's interesting, when we dropped the bill in January, there was a poll that was taken, and roughly almost 80% of North Dakotans backed the bill. The bill had such strong support in the Senate. Out of 144 legislators, there were 7 that was red. The rest were green. So it has tremendous amount of support in the legislature, tremendous amount of support in the state for going down this road. It really is a game changer, as we all use the word up here for that. So I'm excited to see what happens with it. It's going to be really interesting to see what Brent and the board does as we go along. But I do think it's going to help the oil and gas industry. We'll give you another avenue to try to access some capital and build out your businesses here in the state. So again, like I said, it's a fairly simple bill, but with huge implications. So.
Representative Nathe, if you could also go through 1380, which is another, we called it the legacy trifecta. There were 3 legacy fund bills. We don't need to get into the bonding bill here, but that's pretty exciting for folks in Fargo and Minot to get these flood control projects paid down, leveraging a stream of the earnings from the legacy fund to pay for the bonds. But House Bill 1380 was called the Streams Bill, and that's one thing that our citizens are really interested in, is what are we doing with the earnings off this sovereign wealth fund? Now we know we can invest some of the capital in the state, but what are we doing with the earnings? And so if you could jump into that as well.
Yeah, the 1380 is a streams bill, and in the past we have been, and rightfully so, I think the legislature has been criticized for not having a plan. What are you guys going to do with that earnings? How are you using that earnings? And appropriations, we do not want to use it to balance the budget, and we're trying to wean ourselves off of that. But yet we want to use those earnings to address some of the most pressing needs we have in this state. So the streams bill, what it does is take some of that earnings and then designates it for certain areas that we want to address. Right now, at the end of this session, they're projecting the earnings off the legacy fund to be roughly $735 million. Within the next session or two, we're going to be over $1 billion in earnings. And up until this session, we did not have a game plan or how we're going to work with all that money, and where's that money going to go? Does some of it go back into the fund? Do we put some of it over here, some of it over there? So we had a lot of discussions in the House before it passed, a lot of contentious discussions in the Senate and back and forth, and we finally came up with a game plan to tackle this And it's a great problem to have, but we want to make sure we know what we're going to do with this money and how we're going to spend it. It would be money that's not for ongoing expenses, not for funding day-to-day government. It's money that's going to be used to meet the needs that we need to take care of right now here in the state, and make sure we use those state dollars in a very, very wise way to do it. So again, it's the money that this industry has generated. We want to make sure that we're using it the best we can for the citizens of the state.
Thank you, Representative Nathe. So he's also a sponsor, prime sponsor of the LIFT Bill 1141, which is if you're bringing these projects like what Senator Patten's talking about, where it's actually a technology play with flare gas, et cetera, then LIFT might be for you as well. So if you could tee into that, and then also remind us in 1380 there was some intent to put some money maybe into clean, sustainable, and LIFT and research, et cetera. If you could also share that.
Well, as far as 1380 and into that bucket, we're looking, I believe it's $60 million for the research, another $60 million into LIFT and clean, sustainable, so about $120 million in that stream for some of the things that we're talking about. The LIFT bill is something we passed last session. This session, we came up with it again, the funding for $15 million. Basically what LIFT is to help companies that are just on that 20-yard line. They've done the first 80 yards of research to get their business going, but they're just on the cusp of getting that business going, and they need just a little bit more help to get over that goal line and to hit profitability and with their products and hit the market. Last session after we passed the bill, we had $15 million also. 18 companies from the upper Midwest, a lot of them from Minnesota, came into North Dakota, basically Fargo and Grand Forks, bringing roughly 400 to 500 jobs. GDP was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. In fact, we had one company come from Elk River, Minnesota, set up shop in Horace with a $60 million payroll, average job of $70,000, and it's a high-tech company. So this session, we were able to secure another $15 million, and if I have a way, I'm going to try to get some more come fall. But we have over 60 companies in the pipeline from around the country that are looking to take advantage of this program. We've talked to certain companies that have looked at programs like this all over the country, and they say without a doubt this LIFT program is the best one that they've seen. So it's a program where once they get awarded, they get 3 years of no interest, and the 4th year they start paying back that loan. And the idea is to help them get over that hump, get them into commercialization, and away we go. So it's turned out to be extremely successful in less than 24 months, and we hope for some more success.
Thank you, Representative Nathe. So what happened during this session is I believe we've gone from being a venture capital desert in North Dakota where we do not have venture capital available. One of the numbers that we saw at State Investment Board is maybe as little as $30 million of investment from a venture side within the state. And now with 1425, we've already deployed $250 million from the Sovereign Wealth Fund, from the legacy funds to be invested in the state of North Dakota. Representative Nathe is talking about the LIFT bill, which is seed capital for the really early phase entrepreneurs and technology. And so there's opportunity for those companies that are looking to start, stay here, take advantage of our energy, our agriculture, our technology, and our friendly regulatory environment. So we're very happy and pleased with the session from that standpoint. We have a little time here. I'd like to let Senator Bell riff a little bit on the fact that there's not only the appropriation for Clean Sustainable Energy Authority for the grants, but also there was a line of credit that was attached. This for a very exciting project that ties the oil and gas and the lignite industries together as well.
Well, I touched on ESG a little bit earlier. Of course, you're all very familiar with how that affects your access to capital, and it's a problem that all types of energy projects are facing, but specifically carbon capture projects, which take upwards of $1 billion, as I'm sure you're also all aware, to try and get up and off the ground. And so trying to find access to that much cash and capital can be a very, very heavy lift. And so projects like Project Tundra, which has been an ongoing project trying to get up and off the ground for a few years now, hopefully this would be access to one last tool that they would need to be able to get that project up and running. There's $250 million available with a line of credit through our Bank of North Dakota, which continues to be just a fabulous asset that the state has access to. They've helped us solve so many problems this session. I know all of us have great relationships with the bank up here. And that access to line of credit, whether Project Tundra is awarded all of that, a piece of that, or other projects that are working on that last step to commercialization, solving that issue of access to capital through bills like 1425, through this line of credit through Clean Sustainable Energy Authority, and grant dollars available through the Clean Sustainable Energy Authority are all pieces of the puzzle to try and help all of you do what you do best, and that's business here in North Dakota.
Thank you, Senator Bell. Since we have the finance and tax and the natural resource leaders up here, I'd like to see which one of them wants to take a crack at Senate Bill 2319. But just looking around the room, and I'm thinking about what issues are they most concerned about. And any oil producer that I talk to, the reason we don't have 50 or 60 drilling rigs, the reason we have 12 to 15 is because of concern of takeaway capacity on what is the future of the DAPL pipeline. And so there were quite a few bills that went through the session that indirectly we feel could help in that regard as far as with our tribal partners with MHA. And last session was with Senator Bell's predecessor as the chair of Senate Finance and Tax, Senator Dwight Cook, was his passion to get the revenue sharing figured out the right way, where MHA Nation is pleased with the sharing ability of the tax with the state and the legislature is also pleased with the end result. And so that was called the 80-20 bill, where the trust minerals on the reservation are 80% of the tax goes to the tribe and 20% of the tax goes to the state. And the opposite is on the non-trust minerals, the private minerals for the fee lands, and that's 80% to the state, 20% to the tribe. The one thing left was straddle wells. As we all know, anybody that operates on the edge of the MHA reservation nation where there's over 20% of our oil and gas is produced, the straddle wells where they come from one side to the other and go under that border creates a point of contention. And so we feel we came to some peace on that with Senate Bill 2319. There was leadership from Senator Patten on the Senate side, but him and Senator Warden were able to move the bill to the House, where the real negotiations actually ended up happening. So Representative Bosch, I know you were in part of those meetings. If you'd just share a little bit of what happened with 2319.
Sure. Thank you. That bill, there was some contentions, conversations that took place there, but at the end, I think that we wanted to have some consistency and clear-cut rules behind those straddle wells, and I think having that was what was really important for the producers and the tribe and the state, frankly. And so for us to finally solve that last piece of the puzzle was important, I think, for everyone. And I think now everybody feels comfortable moving forward, and we can take advantage of those resources that are in those straddle well areas on the tribe and off the tribe as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for your work on that in House Finance and Tax. We do have some time left. Representative Porter, would you have any closing comments? I know you usually are good for those.
Yeah, it's always tough to follow such a great panel. I think, one of the key takeaways to all of the good things that we get to do in North Dakota is you guys, your industries. The Legacy Fund wouldn't exist without you. It is the tax dollars that you pay off of the oil coming out of the ground that funds the Legacy Fund. It is the interest from the Legacy Fund. You guys are funding our Water Resources Trust Fund, all of the infrastructure things that we're able to do and to stay caught up with. When Wall Street turns their back on you, I think the clear message is that the state of North Dakota is here. We've made that very clear and very well known that we're going to be here to help with research, to crack the code for the next 10 or 15% production out of the Bakken, to invest in infrastructure, to get the necessary roads and water and utilities out to where you need them, to invest in your next generation technology to make it clean and sustainable, low emission, so that it's a sellable product to the coasts. And we're not just taking your money and turning our back on the industry. We're collecting a tax, and we're partnering with you and reinvesting with you in keeping your industry alive and well in North Dakota and doing whatever we can to keep the regulations at a minimum and to keep the research at a maximum and to keep your companies in a competitive environment in a worldwide market. So I want to thank you for trusting us in North Dakota, because without you, we really wouldn't be sitting here right now.
Thank you, Representative Porter. Senator Bell, closing comments?
It's tough to beat what Representative Porter just talked about. And I think he really did hit the nail on the head. We can't do what we do in the legislature, providing resources to keep you guys up and running without you guys being here in the first place. So as we look to the future, especially after comments like that, I remain hopeful. I know that it feels like there are very large hurdles in front of us. As someone who works in the coal industry, I know what looking at those hurdles feels like very well. But I always remain hopeful. I tell Coal Country to remain hopeful, and I remain hopeful that we'll continue to be able to help businesses grow with our low emissions, forward-thinking legislation, with access to capital, and with whatever it is that the industry is looking at like it needs a year and a half from now when we go back and we do this all again. And so even with the world feeling the way that it feels right now, I really think that we've got a bright future here in North Dakota, and we've got great companies to work in partnership with, and I look forward to being able to do that as long as I'm able.
Thank you, Senator Bell. I can tell you from my standpoint, just in the week since the session is over, I've had conversations about hydrogen projects coming to the state. We've had multiple large data processing projects announced. We've had, and more to come. We've had renewable diesel that is it's bringing our soybean producers together into a plant in Jamestown that was announced with ADM just this week, that then that soybean crude oil is offloaded to a Marathon facility in Dickinson to produce renewable diesel, to be able to combine with their oil and gas operations that they so need today in this ESG environment. But I see the Clean Sustainable Energy Authority as nothing less than bringing North Dakota to the forefront of a green energy future. There's nothing we need to be embarrassed about with the Biden administration, with the minds you have up here, with the support from our legislature, with the industry that's here, the things that we all want to do the right thing. We also want to be able to make money. We also want to be able to produce the energy for the world and lead that direction right here from the state. So thank you all for what you do. And that brings us up to, looks like 5 seconds left. So if Kathy's up here, I know she's going to kick off our panel, but thank you for coming. Thank you for being here in Bismarck. It's nice to see you all here face to face, like I say, after the year that we've had. So thank you all.
Well, thank you, Lieutenant Governor. That was awesome. Senator Bell, Representatives Porter, Bosch, and Nathe. What a great discussion that they had. And you know, to this group here, I look mostly at the discussion about the Legacy Fund. The Legacy Fund is a financial planning gift. And please remember, it's from our industry, oil and gas legacy. And I think that's so important, and I want us to continue to remember that it's our hard work, yours and mine, that is continuing to build this legacy for the future of North Dakota. Our next speaker hails from the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. Neel Kashkari has been the bank's president and chief executive officer since 2016. Many of you will remember Neel. He joined us and was on this stage with me in 2016 and 2018. In his role, Neel serves on the Federal Open Market Committee, bringing the 9th District's perspective to monetary policy in Washington, D.C. Neel was instrumental in establishing the Opportunity and Inclusive Growth Institute, whose mission is to ensure world-class research and helps improve the economic well-being of all Americans. Under his leadership, the Minneapolis Fed has released an action plan, Ending Too Big to Fail. This calls for tighter bank regulations to avoid future taxpayer bailouts of large financial institutions. Here to share a conversation on the economic outlook via video is Neel Kashkari. Welcome, Neel, and welcome back to the Williston Basin Petroleum Conference. You and I were together a couple of times now, 2016, 2018. Thank you for joining us again.
Well, thank you for having me. I had a wonderful time in person in 2016 and 2018, and I'm honored to be with you again. And I hope sometime in the future I'll be able to rejoin you live and in person. But it's great to be here, Kathy. Thank you.
Well, you are welcome, and we'll look forward to that in person again, Neel. With that, what I'd like to do is give you a chance to just give us a little, introduction on the Fed and some of your opening remarks, please.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. The Federal Reserve is our nation's central bank. We were created by Congress in 1913, and our jobs are to manage the ups and downs of the U.S. economy, to try to achieve an economy that has stable growth and what we call maximum employment, as many Americans as possible gainfully employed and contributing to our economy. But back in 1913, Congress did something unique. They said, we don't want the central bank simply housed in Washington, D.C. We want to spread it out around the country so that all the different regions of the country are represented and part of the policymaking process. So they created 12 independent Federal Reserve banks, the ninth of which is the Minneapolis Fed. And the Minneapolis Fed covers a region that includes Minnesota, North and South Dakota, Montana, part of Michigan, and part of Wisconsin. So a big part of my job is to go around our state, and I was very actively traveling pre-COVID and will be again soon, but go around our state and make sure that my colleagues and I know what's happening here on the ground in the regional economy. So that when I go back to Washington, D.C. every 6 weeks, where we set interest rates for the country, this region is thought about and part of that policy process. Now, we all use the dollar as our currency, so we can't set a different interest rate for North Dakota or for New York or for California. We have to try to pick the right interest rate that works for the United States of America as a whole. But my job is to make sure that our region is represented in those deliberations. And so that's why getting to come to this conference, getting to know you, Kathy, you served on our board of directors, meeting with business leaders across North Dakota, meeting with workers, other leaders, helps make me smarter about what's happening in the economy. And so that's why I'm here. That's our job at the Federal Reserve. We also supervise banks. We do a lot of other things. We provide cash. So if you go to your ATM and you take out cash from your ATM, it would have started out in our vault in the Minneapolis Fed. We provide a lot of different services to make sure that the U.S. economy can function and that all of our great companies across the country, large and small, are able to operate, able to compete and do their very best. And so we're here to try to represent all of you and make sure that the U.S. economy is as competitive as it possibly can be.
Neel, thank you so much. And I want to, you brought up the idea of how the board works, and we bring as board members. I think I was really surprised to find out how much input our business leaders have with this direct channel to you. I want to thank you. I want to thank you for that opportunity. And just quickly, is that across the board with the Fed? Is that how it works at all 12 districts?
Yes, all 12 independent Federal Reserve banks each have a board of directors, and each of those boards are 9 leaders. They're everything from bankers to business leaders, small businesses, big businesses, nonprofits, labor, education, to make sure that we are covering the breadth of our society and getting input from all facets. And so, Kathy, you were a director on our board for 6 years. You did a fantastic job. And we always knew we could count on you to get the latest input on what is happening in the energy sector in North Dakota, but also across the country and also around the world. Energy is such an important input to our economy that was a vital input for us, and we value your contribution and really appreciate your service.
Well, it certainly was an honor for me, Neel, and I really enjoyed that time. Now, as we get into our discussion here, the first thing I'd like to talk with you about is the dual mandate, and I have a couple questions for you on that. But before I get into my questions, could you just give us a little primer on what the dual mandate is?
Absolutely. So Congress assigned the Federal Reserve, they created the Federal Reserve, and they gave us our mission, our goals. Two of our goals, what we call the dual mandate, one of which is stable prices, what we've defined as an average of 2% inflation. And think about an economy that's not overheating, but also not limping along, steady growth. The other one is maximum employment, which I mentioned earlier, as many Americans as possible participating in the workforce, contributing to our economy. Now, normally we think these two sides of the dual mandate are like a seesaw. When the economy heats up, unemployment goes down, which is good, but then businesses struggle to find workers, they have to pay up, and that can lead to inflation. So we are trying to balance the two sides of the seesaw so that we have maximum employment and a steady growing economy that's not overheating. That's what we're trying to achieve when we move interest rates up and down, and that's what we call our dual mandate.
Awesome. Now, with that, knowing where our labor market is today, how are you going to know when we reach maximum employment?
You know, that's a good question, Kathy. Historically, we would look at the unemployment rate, which at the peak of this pandemic was very high. It's fallen to around 6% nationally recently. It's higher in some areas, but that 6% number misses a lot of people who've given up looking for work. One of the funny things about how we calculate unemployment, if you've given up and you're not looking for a job, you're not counted as unemployed. So we try to estimate how many of those folks there are too. As of today, there are roughly 8 or 8.5 million Americans who are not working, who were working before the pandemic hit. That implies a real unemployment rate of 8 or 9% nationally, a very high unemployment rate if you factor all those folks in. So to assess, are we really at full employment or maximum employment? I'm going to look at that headline unemployment rate. I'm going to look at how many workers say they're not looking for work. I'm going to look at wage growth. In the last expansion, we heard a lot of businesses saying we can't find workers, but it wasn't until the very end of the expansion that we really started to see wages pick up. Think about supply and demand in a market. If the oil market is really tight and there's really a shortage, it should show up in the price. And so there are a lot of different measures that I will look at to assess whether we're at maximum employment. And I'll tell you right now, we are a long way away from maximum employment.
All righty. Well, with that, let's go back to March of 2020. I was still on the board at that point. I remember you talking about, indicating we would probably be in lockdown for the next 18 months. I remember thinking, you have to be kidding me. However, you also brought up it would be dependent on the virus, the course the virus took, and the vaccine, the course on where the vaccines. We're now, 14 months later. What's your take on this recovery? Where do you think we are in our recovery mode?
Well, the vaccine news is wonderful good news. I mean, a lot of experts a year ago, health experts, weren't sure if we'd even have a vaccine a year later or 5 years later. So it's a brilliant breakthrough of science that we have several really good vaccines. I'm proud to say I'm vaccinated, and I feel good about it because I feel safe now. So the vaccines are really good news. Right now, we're still in a race, vaccinating more Americans, and we've got these new variants of the virus that are more contagious that are also spreading. The U.S. economy is poised for a very strong recovery if we keep doing a good job in getting Americans vaccinated so we can reopen everything safely. And it's not simply about government lockdowns. That's part of it. But a lot of Americans locked themselves down. They got nervous and they said, hey, I don't want to get COVID. I don't want to give it to my parents or my kids or my sister or my brother. So they just said, I'm not going to go out to restaurants anymore. I'm not going to go into movie theaters. Ultimately, the American people need to feel safe for us to fully restore our economy. And that means we have to defeat the virus. We're on track. We've got a path to do it. We're not there yet. We just need to finish the job.
I agree. And I think we're on a good path for that. You also mentioned that an inflation uptick is to be expected. Most believe that it would be short-term and the economy would readjust back to steadier times. But what if it's not short-term? What if it's not transitory? Does that concern you? Do you have concerns about an increase in inflation going ahead?
Well, it's something we're paying a very close attention to. I'll tell you why we believe it's transitory. A number of reasons, but I'll give you one that will really resonate with you. Think about what happened to oil prices a year ago, March, right? They just plummeted like you wouldn't believe. And when the math works, when you calculate annual inflation, so this March, we're comparing oil prices relative to last March. And then it's this April relative to last April. As those really low readings fall out of the calculation, it's going to look like, oh my gosh, energy prices are just soaring as these calculations get renewed on an annual, rolling annual basis. So part of it is simply math because a lot of prices fell dramatically at the beginning of the pandemic. We also know we have shortages. We know that as businesses are adjusting, as global supply chains are adjusting, those adjustments don't just happen overnight. And as the economy reopens, it may reopen more quickly than some of those supply chains can adjust. That can also lead to a temporary boost in prices. So right now, we think most of those are going to be short-lived, and that we will get back to the kind of hopefully 2% inflation that we're targeting. But of course, we don't know that for certain. So we're going to pay very close attention to what's happening to wages, what's happening to the labor force, what's happening to commodity prices here and around the world. And if we're surprised that the high inflation seems like it's here to stay, at that point, once we've put Americans back to work, we'll raise rates or adjust monetary policy to keep inflation in check. We know how to do that, and we have very powerful tools to do that. The key is, let's not do it prematurely and shortcut the recovery.
Neel, can you just briefly talk? We have such a strong research department also at the Minneapolis Fed. How does that go hand in hand with this work you do?
Well, you're right. We've got wonderful economists that are looking at data all around the country, all around the world, whether it's the energy sector or consumer sectors, to try to figure out what is the data telling us about the state of the economy. And I'll give you an example. So the Minneapolis Fed was an outlier in the Federal Reserve. I voted against interest rate increases in the last expansion, 2017, 2018, 2019. The reason I did that is because with the help of our researchers, I looked at the data and said, hey, I don't think we're really at full employment. The headline unemployment rate fell down to 3.5%, a very low level relative to history. But the more we looked at the data and the more we talked to people, we said, I think there's still people on the sidelines who are not counted that actually want to work. So we're not really at full employment. Therefore, we should not be raising interest rates. Our researchers at the Minneapolis Fed were key to me doing that analysis and drawing that conclusion. And I'm really happy to say I think we were right. And now the Federal Reserve has embraced that view and said, you know what? Maximum employment is a hard thing to know for sure. Let's wait till we really get there before we raise interest rates so we don't cut off the recovery prematurely.
That's really a change in some of the thinking, and I think you should be proudly a outlier in that work. Thank you. Next, I'd like to move on a little bit to the payroll protection program. The Federal Reserve System had a big role in helping with the recovery by maintaining liquidity in the markets. And the Minneapolis Fed was central to that. The role that the Minneapolis Fed played in the payroll protection plan. I know that Christine Gaffney and her crew just were outstanding. They were fabulous. Can you tell us a little bit about that plan over the last year and how you see things moving forward?
Sure. Well, I think, first of all, Congress is to be applauded in moving so aggressively when the pandemic first hit in a bipartisan basis to support small businesses, to say, look, we have to shut the economy down to try to save lives, but we need to support small businesses to help you bridge through this until we can get to the other side. So I think Congress should be applauded. There's no way for the government to go out and make potentially millions of individual loans. They needed to work through banks, and in many cases, community banks all across our country, because they had the relationships with the small businesses in Minot, in Williston, all across North Dakota. Well, many of those small banks said, hey, we're happy to make these loans and work with our customers, but we need some funding to fund that loan. That's where the Federal Reserve came in. So we set up a program called the Paycheck Protection Program Liquidity Facility that said if a small bank or a big bank makes a PPP loan, they can then bring that loan to the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, and we will give them cash, loan them money, so that they can go make more loans. We set this program up. All 12 Federal Reserve banks across the country were deeply involved in this. They all set this up together to make loans all across the country to help banks get money out to their borrowers. And so I think the program, the PPP, was, there's always criticisms after the fact. No program is perfect, but I think overall it was highly effective in getting money out to small businesses across America. And many of the banks that made those loans turned to the Federal Reserve for funding. And we are proud to have played an important role in supporting them getting that money out there.
Neel, there's a lot of companies and workers, workforce, and company executives in this room today, who have benefited by that. I think it's wonderful. Our hats off to you, and thank you very much to you and your crew, your team, for that. Let's move ahead. I want to talk a little bit about some of these stimulus packages that are moving before us. Back in 2008, you were one of the authors of the TARP program and helped bring us through that time. And I remember you're talking about, the need to be big enough, to be big and bold, to get a nation of this size and magnitude through these, just incredibly trying times. However, as I continue to watch, the news and the newspapers and I read about the families plan, infrastructure plan, 1.2 trillion here and 2 trillion here. And, I kind of wonder, at what point do you become concerned, or are we on the right path? What is too much?
It's a very good question, Kathy. And the honest answer is nobody knows for sure. I think most economists are surprised at how much capacity the U.S. government has to issue debt at very low interest rates. I think most people, if you told them 10 years ago or 20 years ago, we'd have this level of debt, most people would have said, oh my gosh, interest rates are going to be much higher. But investors around the world have great confidence in the U.S. economy and the U.S. legal system and our political system. As much as it seems dysfunctional at times, investors around the world have confidence in America. And that's why they're able to lend, they lend to America at such low interest rates. But of course, you can't push that forever. At some point, there will be a limit. And no one knows for sure exactly what that limit is. So a key question is going forward in terms of the new programs that are being proposed. A key question is, will they be quote unquote paid for? There are two ways the federal government can pay for programs. One is they could cut spending somewhere else and replace it with the new spending. That's not inflationary because you're just lowering spending here and raising it here. They offset each other. Or they can pay for it by raising taxes to fund the new spending. That also is not inflationary because you're taking money out of the economy with one hand and you're putting it back in the economy with the other hand. So the details matter a lot. And ultimately, it'll depend on whether or not Congress says, okay, we want to cut spending. I don't hear much appetite for that. We want to raise taxes and we want to spend it here. And are we going to spend it wisely? There's a difference between spending on current consumption and spending on true investment. I think most people would argue, if think about investing in the oil sector. You make an investment in the oil sector expecting some kind of return over time. Those kind of investments can be very positive for the country, but the decisions, the details matter a lot.
That's a good, a wonderful point for my next question, because I want to talk a little bit about where the price of oil is. And, right now we've been hovering in that, mid $60 for West Texas intermediate crude, above or below a little bit. And yet that's a fairly okay number. We can drill at that, but for some reason, we're not seeing the drilling picking up. We are seeing the production continue. The wells are coming onto production that might have been delayed, but we're not seeing the drilling happening. Do you have a sense for what's going on, with that, and what might be causing the holdup on the build out and exploration of resources?
Well, let me just start by saying the energy sector is so important to the economy as a whole, and especially American economic competitiveness. The innovations that have taken place in the Bakken, in Texas, et cetera, over the last 20 years are profoundly important to the global economy because you may not like me to say this, but because of you've all been so successful, you've effectively capped the price of energy. And that has geopolitical implications in addition to profound economic implications. And so I think a robust, innovative energy sector is enormously important. I'll give you an amateur opinion on what might be going on, but I'd be interested, Kathy, in your view, because you're one of the real experts. I think investors get reminded that sometimes bad things happen and that there are shocks. You saw that in housing. There was boom in housing construction up to 2007, 2008. Then you had the terrible housing downturn. The housing construction market has never fully recovered relative to where it was in 2006 and 2007, because I think a lot of investors said, whoa, there are risks here that I didn't fully appreciate. My guess is that's probably going on in the energy sector too, which is people said, wow, energy prices can fall precipitously in ways we didn't think were possible. We saw the negative numbers pricing for a few days. That might be chilling investors who are saying, you know what, maybe I'm going to go slow as we start investing again in the energy sector. But Kathy, I'm really interested in your view on this.
What I see on it, Neel, just as maybe a follow up along that line of thinking, because it's so important where the equity and where is the investment, where is the capital coming into, to fund this drilling and exploration and such. I get the feeling that, and what I'm, just talking to people is that shareholders are now looking a little safer, maybe get a return on their investment, in returning cash and capital, as opposed to building out the resource and exploring and expanding the resource that way. Now that may not be exactly what's going on. I think there may be some of that. I think there's also some uncertainties. I know there is regarding Dakota Access Pipeline. I mean, we have to know that just is one of those things that hangs over this industry here. Even though we look as though we're moving forward, oil continues to flow, 570,000 barrels a day down that pipeline, and we're trying to balance the interests. I'm always a big one on saying, let's keep it fair. Let's balance, the good and the bad, the pros and the cons. And I think we're working through that. Where do you see the input of something like Dakota Access? Is that a big game changer in your world?
Well, I mean, I think the energy sector as a whole is, and if it's important in the energy sector, then it's important to the U.S. economy and economic competitiveness. I'll need to defer to other experts, you and your colleagues in the industry, as to all the different ways you can move oil safely. Pipelines are obviously very effective. Rail, you showed me a tour of I'm going to get the nomenclature wrong, but where they fill up the train tankers with oil in North Dakota. So, I think there are economic implications of this. And I also think uncertainty hangs over everything, right? There's political uncertainty, there's policy uncertainty, there's also just economic uncertainty. But the trend that you mentioned, we see this in a lot of industries. Over the last 10 years, you've seen a lot more industries buying back their stock rather than making new investments. The place where that was less true was in the energy sector, because people said, wow, there are great returns to be had to go develop these new oil wells. And I think right now they're a little bit gun shy based on what's happened over the past year or 18 months.
Thanks, Neel. I want to just change us up a little bit as I finish up with the last couple of questions here. And when we talk about the geopolitical ramifications of all these moves that happen, I'm looking at a trade deficit. I'm reading 71.1 billion back in February. Tell me something. We have the players with China. We have the different geopolitical situations in this, around the globe. How troubling is a trade deficit to you?
It's not troubling by itself, because the way the math works out in global trade and global economics, if investors around the world have confidence in America and want to buy into U.S. Treasury bonds or stocks in America, the math works that it's going to balance out by us having a trade deficit. So it's actually, in some ways, it's a vote of confidence that people say, we actually are very optimistic about America's future relative to other major economies. Having said that, there is no question that we need fair trade around the world, and especially with China. And we have not had fair trade with China. And so I think both the prior administration, the Trump administration, and the Biden administration have changed the tenor of how we think about trade with China. I think before that, it was, well, let's just pursue free trade and eventually they'll come around. They didn't seem to be coming around to free trade. And so we actually do need fair trade so our businesses and our entrepreneurs and our workers can compete on a level playing field around the world. We do need fair trade, but I'm not that concerned about the trade deficit itself as a measurement of that.
Well, good. And I think as you know, just an add on to that, protecting our intellectual property. I mean, that's a huge issue.
It absolutely is. And, you see it. What I find interesting is some of our most amazing technology breakthroughs, say, take an iPhone. They're made in China, but China doesn't know how to rip it off because it's such a complicated product. Or think about the new vaccines that have been developed by Pfizer, as an example, and Moderna. Such incredible, complicated high tech. If some company wants to go try to rip it off and make it themselves, good luck. So it's a very interesting and complicated problem, but there's no question we absolutely need to protect our IP. As I just said, some products are easier than others because the technology to replicate them is so fiendishly complicated.
Thank you. Neel, I'm going to change it up as we finish up here. I just have one thing that I just really, truly wonder about. I'm sure, people in this room do as well. We're going to move into a question on Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, and such. And I'm reading some articles about Ethereum blockchain network is up 300%. Bitcoin is up 95%. I don't even know what they're up compared relative to. Can you just give us a little 101 on what and how in the world does a Bitcoin work in, without having a nation that can tax the asset or have gold or silver behind it? How does that work?
Yeah, well, it's right now, it's just, these are pure speculative bets that might keep going up and they might go to zero. And your guess is as good as mine as whether they're going to go up or they're going to go to zero. The proponents of Bitcoin will say you can never have inflation with Bitcoin because the way the program has been designed, it limits the number of Bitcoins that can ever be produced. So you could never have high inflation. Well, that may be true for Bitcoin, but there's 1,000 of these out there. And if you go back in American history, there was a time in America when every state had its own currency and every bank issued its own currency. And even if you said, well, no, North Dakota's currency is going to be sound. If all the other states around you were printing crazy currencies and it was hard to distinguish them, you'd have inflation because you'd have too many different currencies. That's what's happening in the cryptocurrency space. There are thousands of these currencies that are out there. It's anybody's guess. Will any of them survive? Will any of them become a winner? Nobody knows right now. So, I think it's an interesting space. It's really innovative and creative. We should watch it, but I'm very cautious about it because it might go up and it might go to zero. And anybody who tells you they know for sure doesn't know what they're talking about.
I believe you on that part of it. As we talk about that and you talk about all the different cryptocurrencies and Bitcoins out there and such, you have a display at the Minneapolis Fed that shows the different, currencies of the different states. What era was that? 18?
Oh, that was, pre-Civil War. Pre-Civil War is when that was the height of it. And, it was, Lincoln finally said, we need to finance the war. And Lincoln was actually helped to modernize how the U.S. government issues debt and currencies to try to get that under control. And then it took a long time, but eventually leading up to the Federal Reserve creation in 1913.
Awesome. Neel, this has been fascinating. You have such a way to share a complicated issue and the whole unknown of central bank and the Federal Reserve System with us. I want to thank you so much for joining us. You've been here today, and I'm going to look forward to the next invitation when we get back in person together.
Thank you, Kathy. It's been great fun and appreciate having me at the conference.
Thank you. And now in person. Just don't scare my children if they think I'm actually in two places at one time. I do want to thank Neel Kashkari. I'm telling you, it was wonderful talking with him, meeting with him, and Neel knows the oil field. He has been out on the drilling rigs, on the rig floor 3 times that I'm aware of, and the entire board has been here and done the Hess Follow the Barrel tour twice. So let me tell you, we have a central bank in Minneapolis Fed that knows our Bakken play, so that's wonderful. Our next speaker is Mr. Mike Nasi. Mike is a partner with Jackson Walker LLP, where he practices environmental and energy law. Mike has been practicing before state and federal environmental and energy agencies and appellate courts for 28 years. Mr. Nasi's compliance counseling, permitting, and enforcement defense work spans a wide range of federal and state energy and environmental regulatory programs. Mike is counsel for electric generation, mining, and oil and gas interests in state, regional, and national litigation and policy initiatives. Mike is here today to tell us more about energy security resilience and reliability. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Mike Nasi.
All right, everybody. Why is a Texan in North Dakota? A little storm called Winter Storm Uri maybe demonstrated Texans need to pay a little bit more attention to how things are done in North Dakota, perhaps, right? But the title of this talk is not about, necessarily how to show a bunch of Texans to stay warm in the oil patch. It's about the electric grid, and it's about the lessons that were learned. And the title, I've kind of provocatively put up there is "The world needs to learn from the lesson that Texas just did," because it could have been much worse, and it is a cautionary tale for everybody about the nature of our grid and the importance of reliability and resilience, and we'll talk about both. So what went wrong? Had to use it. Houston, we have a problem. Clearly, it was a lot of other places too, but as a Texan, we're going to invoke that theme. This slide is really wonky and very detailed, and get out your pens because we're going to spend an hour on it. Just kidding. The most important thing about this slide is at the bottom of that graph. You probably can't make it out, but if you're an electricity nerd like me, that is the scariest thing you can see. That is the frequency drop in the Texas grid, which serves 26 million people. It dropped lower than it ever has, and it dropped within about 4 minutes or 2/100ths of a hertz from blacking out the entire Texas ERCOT grid. And so we had a horrible storm. We had millions, 4 million Texans have no power for multiple days, but we recovered. We did tragically lose people. At least 115, maybe as many 200 people died because of the event. It was a tragic event, but it could have been catastrophic. If we would have dropped below this bottom of this graph, and we were very close, that grid would have completely blacked out. And as an electricity geek, there's a difference between blackouts and brownouts and power outages. Blackouts mean you lose all voltage and frequency in the system such that you have to manually restart it from scratch, kind of like pressurizing up a line of a pipe or a plumbing system for that matter. That would have taken at least a month, maybe 6 weeks by most experts' estimation. Imagine 26 million people without power, no power, for a month. We would have been talking about this event for decades. We still will be talking about this event for decades. Why do I start the graph with this? Because it's so important that everybody in the country and frankly the world sees just how close we were to that kind of disaster. And frankly, we were lucky that it didn't happen. So let's talk about how we got there. First of all, your legislature knows, because they've invited me to testify a few times, that this has been brewing for a while. I have been maybe a little bit of a Chicken Little type of guy in the past, saying that this was going to happen. I'm not glad that I was right, but I ain't no Chicken Little anymore, okay? And the reason I was so concerned and continue to be concerned, so you know, punchline of the story, is because the signs, the warning signs were there. The good news for North Dakota is you are about where Texas was in 2014. And the mistakes that could get made in your and surrounding states that were made in Texas are the cautionary tale that I'm talking about. First of all, most of our problems in terms of outages and power, high power demand happen in the summer in Texas. The winter event was not unprecedented, but certainly unusual. This is a busy graph, but what this graph tells you is that in each of the last 2 summers, and it will be again this summer, we have had emergency conditions where the amount of power we have available is to meet need thins out so much that we have to go into emergency conservation and in some load shedding. We got lucky in last summer, but the bullet hit this winter. Now, this is a busy graph, but if you go back to anything, I think these will be made available to you. They're certainly in the public sphere in multiple ways. This is EIA data, Energy Information Agency data, okay, coupled with ERCOT timing, et cetera. They're our RTO, our grid operator. And what this tells you is the different kinds of power that were on the system leading up to and then right at the precipitous drop of when the power outages started to impact literally millions of Texans. There's a couple of very important points of this graph that I'll hit now and at the end. First off, the demand is the black line on top, right? So then after we started dropping people off the grid, you have to project what the demand would be, because if you don't have power, you can't demand electricity anymore, right? So the big blue swath is what natural gas does in our market. It saves our market when we have a huge drop-off in our very large renewable fleet. Texas has the largest, by a factor of, I think, 3, wind fleet in the country by a state. A full third of our grid is wind, and a little bit more is solar. The brown there, flatlining, is our coal, and the nuke is on the bottom and it's green. All of the resources took a hit, you'll see, right? But what I'm here to tell you is, I know this is going to be shocking to a bunch of people in North Dakota. Don't believe everything you read in the newspapers or see on TV about this story, because the strangest thing about the press reaction to this event was how everybody jumped out saying that one side was blaming the other before any of us who actually are nerdy enough to actually know the data could conclude one way or the other. And so the data is in now, and I can tell you in a very clear way what the problems were, and that's why I'm here. But everybody pointed their finger at each other. And I'm not going to get into what fuel is good or bad. I'm just going to let you make your own decisions based on the facts that we go through. All right? This is a graph of just the natural gas component. What caused the outages? One of the finger point exercises that's been happening is the power sector lost a lot of fuel supply. The pipeline system in Texas failed the power generation side. But the power generation grid operators also failed the oil and gas sector by cutting off electricity to wellheads and to compressor stations. So they were pointing back and forth. The truth is they were in both places. The dark blue is equipment. The large light blue is weather related. That would be at the power plant weatherization problems. The green is fuel limitations. So the green is when the system operator in their forensic analysis finally concluded, listen, we didn't have fuel to these power plants. If you look at the left-hand side of the line graph, you'll see that there were fuel limitations even before the power outages. So we definitely had some supply interruptions that were not related to electricity issues. But then, of course, the weather-related problems with the fleet itself cut off electricity to certain parts of our oil and gas sector, and then the cascade occurred, all right? So a couple of things I'm going to do is myth bust a little bit. So I'm going to take the same data. This is the same data set, but let's just assume we didn't have any weather issues. Let's put all the power plants that failed because of winter, Let's put all the fuel that did not get to the power plants, let's get it to the power plants. We still would have had over 24 hours of outages in this system. So that is scary because most people have said, oh, this is about winterization, and if Texas just would learn the lesson of the northern states, it wouldn't happen again. The fact is that there are two things that occurred. Again, not unprecedented, but a very long storm, right? The duration of the storm was a problem. And we also have changed the very nature of our electricity grid really in a period of about 7 years in Texas, where we used to have a robust, dispatchable thermal market, and we retired a bunch of it and replaced it with wind. And so when Governor Abbott got on Fox and said, here's the problem we have in our grid, and wind is intermittent, and when it's not blowing, we have problems. Of course, everybody from the left jumped up and said, Abbott is blaming the storm on wind. He wasn't. Anybody who was paying attention to what he said was he was saying something that was factual, which is our grid has changed. We have inundated our grid with a very large intermittent resource, which is awesome when it runs well and exposes the market, usually bailed out by natural gas when it doesn't, when the wind doesn't blow. The problem is we've retired a lot of that buffer that we've always had in our market that you all actually have right now that prevents this kind of thing from happening. So, a couple things I'll show you. Very important when you're looking at data and people say it was weather related. Well, let's understand there's weather related that you can fix with winterization, and then there's weather related that is just weather, right? This chart shows you of all the sub-root causes of different outages, everything from frozen water lines to sensing lines to equipment freezing. And then there was this big discussion about frozen blades at wind farms, okay? That was a factor, but it wasn't that big a factor. If you take away just lost wind, this is how much winterization problem we had in our renewable fleet. The problem with our renewable fleet wasn't winterization, it was weather. I need to go backwards, okay? When you add back just the wind didn't blow, that's how big the outages were, right? But when you just look at what we can winterize, and I made a little funny joke, only a lawyer would think that's funny, winterization won't make the wind blow. It's a really important thing to factor in because our states are very similar. Texas and North Dakota have a lot of similarities. Yes, it's way too hot down there, and yes, it can get way too cold down up here. But just in terms of our energy production, we both produce lignite, we use it for electricity. You all use more of it for electricity. Texas wish it did this winter. So how do we get here, all right? First, let me just recap. If you just said who lost how much during this event in terms of electric generation, wind and natural gas were the big ones, right? And that's why there was this finger-pointing exercise between the two of them. Even environmental groups even pointed to coal, said coal lost, everybody lost generation. The fact is that the coal losses were largely attributable to actual trips associated with the frequency drops, and one very questionable operational technique, which nobody in North Dakota would ever make the mistake of, which is leaving coal in a rail car when it's minus 15. That creates what you call a coalsicle. And that, we didn't have frozen coal piles, we had frozen coal trains, but only at one plant. And then the other plants had some operational issues, but they were recovering quickly. So this was not a coal and nuke story, it was really a gas and renewable story. And so, let's talk about them, okay? Natural gas is the workhorse of the Texas grid. It does an extraordinary job ramping up and down. And this graph here tells you all that you need to know. Our installed capacity for gas is about 50%, 49%. During the period of this storm where we had outages, but remember, 22 million people kept their power. 4 million lost. So somebody saved the rest of the grid. Who was it? It was gas, nuke, and coal. Because look at the percentage that they averaged over the period of time when it was needed most. Look at coal, 12% of the installed capacity, almost 20% of the generation. Nuke also overperformed, if you want to say it that way. And again, we don't expect the wind to blow all the time. But because we have, as you see, a full third of our grid, when you combine wind and solar, when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine for multiple days, you got issues if you don't have a sufficient buffer. So remember this graph, the very first graph. The one thing I didn't take time to point out to you at that point was this thing on the bottom. So this is a busy chart, and this is a really wonky topic, but it's a really important one for you all to understand because federal subsidies have effects that, frankly, nobody thought of. I certainly was a supporter of R&D tax credits and all kinds of other tax credits throughout my career. I'm a huge supporter. I sit on the EERC advisory board to support deployment of R&D and federal incentives for actually next-gen technologies, right? Carbon capture, utilization, and storage. The problem with the production tax credit as it's implemented with the renewable fleet is that wind energy gets it only when they generate. So they will bid their power in a market like ERCOT all the way down and below zero. So why are we geeking out on the economics? It matters. If you look at the left-hand side of this chart, that orange, that's the wind when it's really blowing hard. And it's driving down the big blue swath to almost nothing. That's natural gas having to completely come off the grid. Why is that? Some of it's quick start, so it wouldn't be on if the wind was blowing. The rest of it is actually baseload gas, large combined cycle gas that has no intention to ever have to come off. But you know why it came off, both at the beginning and the end of this storm? Because the production tax credit, when the wind energy is bidding their power negative, means that in order to stay on that grid, you have to pay. People aren't buying your energy, you're paying them to take your energy. So that's why gas and coal, nuke can't do that. We don't want them to. We don't want nuke coming up and down. That's not good for anybody. So that's what happened. And look, the Saturday on the right-hand side of this graph, the Saturday after we fought like crazy, the men and women of all the power utilities in the oil and gas industry were scrambling to keep those other 2 million people with power and trying to get those 4 million people back into power. They were scrambling, and then on Saturday after that week, coal and gas and nuke were paying to stay on the grid again. So that's what happens. So what is the result of that? You can't afford to stay in the grid. In Texas, we retired 6,000 megawatts of coal. That's a huge number. We did it in 5 years. What did we do in that same 5 years? The second half of this graph. We built the biggest wind fleet in the world in terms of a single state and for many countries. We also are in the process of building a huge solar fleet. Many of these resources are valuable to us. They are particularly useful, especially the wind when we're in off-peak, but the solar at peak. In the hot summers, solar has some real good promise. That's why you see so much of it getting built. But during that same time period, we retired all this coal because of that economic situation. And what happened, most people I speak to people all over the world, and they think, oh, well, gas just built and filled in the gap, right? No. Bankers don't fund power plants that have to pay to stay on the grid. So during this unprecedented growth in Texas, where electricity demand continued to increase because the economy was healthy, we basically missed this incredible opportunity to build a whole new set of gas plants. And we were outpaced by wind and solar. Again, they can complement each other, but only if you actually build the gas part, right? And don't retire the coal part. So people were in the papers saying, oh, this is about fossil fuels, coal and gas failed the grid. The retirements of coal and gas baseload, and when I showed you that graph, that table of coal retirements, we actually had gas baseload retirements during the same period. Perfectly good gas plants, not at the end of their useful life, being retired because of that economic situation. Insanity, right? We did it. If you had all those power plants back, and I'm not adding back the ones that were really old, that were truly at the end of their useful life, you get this graph. We might have had a couple of hours of outages that we would have rolled over maybe 100 or 200,000 people. They wouldn't even have thought about it, and this probably wouldn't even have made the news. That's the difference because of those decisions. Coming back up to North Dakota, let's bring this story home. You're in MISO, in part, obviously also in SPP, MISO put out an extraordinary study last year, and it had this magic graph. This is a MISO graph, and it says, hey, this inflection point, this 30%, 33, maybe 34% mark, if you get that much renewable in a system, you're going to have serious issues. That's a distant dream in the MISO world, but remember what I told you the Texas grid is? Guess what happened? That was a pretty prescient, that's a fancy word for saying that they predicted the future. That was a pretty smart thing that MISO said, and we saw it happen. So what happens next? I love this picture. That guy's in big trouble. Well, first there's the economic fallout. Not y'all's problem. See, I threw in a y'all so that you would feel. For those Texans that are in the crowd, and I bet there are a few, maybe kind of our problem. We had more, the value of electricity that was exchanged because of the way the market works, and we're not going to go into why, it just is. The value of exchange of the electricity in that week was more than the prior 4 years combined. So in addition to the hundreds of billions of dollars of property damage and all the other things you might have heard about, the price of electricity had a huge consequence on the market participants. Most ratepayers, thankfully, will be protected, but only because the legislature is working hard on that topic, and I will explain that at the end. This is a busy slide, but it's basically designed to tell you, don't turn off your TVs yet, because this summer in Texas, 4 out of the 7 scenario that ERCOT runs have us in negative reserve margins. That's a fancy way of saying we will have emergency conditions, maybe significant power outages again this summer. Next winter could be interesting if we have another long storm. So what are we doing about it? And some of this is, again, not your problem, but it's really important to understand that when a state that's about to be a 30 million, population state has that happen on their watch, and they're so different than California, we really need to focus on how did they get there, and then what are they going to do to solve it? Because California's solution to its rolling blackouts last summer was to, I'm not really even exaggerating, Green New Deal. Let's build more renewables and force the retirement of fossil energy. What? Like, did anybody just watch what went on in Texas and can do basic math? Again, this is not about blaming renewables. It's about accelerating their involvement in the grid too fast and taking too much reliable energy off the grid at the same time. So Texas is doing a lot of things. I'm not going to give you a primer of all the legislation that passed, but let's spend an hour. No, I'm just kidding. I'm a visual learner. I can't keep track of all these bills. Texas has a large legislature. It serves a lot of people. It is different, though. There's only 31 senators in Texas. Each of the senators in Texas, say, I'm not a native Texan. I never say stuff like this, but I always tell my North Dakota friends this just because it's kind of funny. Each of those senators who's supposed to stay in touch with their constituents represents more people than live in North Dakota. Over 1 million people. Isn't that crazy? How do you keep in touch? I don't know. I talk to the senators here all the time. That's a tough constituency when you're a state senator. But we have about 7,000 bills get filed. Like North Dakota, we're a small government state, so thankfully not that many of them pass. But there are, 400 or so bills focused on the power outages and solving them. And these are what you might call the 30 or 40 likely contenders, but not a single one has finally passed, just so you know. Like North Dakota, we only meet once every 2 years, and they've got 20 days. So a lot is going to get done. It's crazy that I'm able to be here today. I'm glad I am, but I'm going to be racing back very quickly because we've got more to do. The most important thing, in my opinion, that we have passed so far, and there will be a lot of other important measures, but perhaps the most pertinent, relevant thing for North Dakota and the oil and gas space in particular, but coal benefits from this too, is the statement that Texas just made with the passage of Senate Bill 13. I call it, because I'm not that funny, the energy ban. Now, Senator Bell mentioned ESG. So if you haven't heard of ESG, I'm so glad you have a life and you don't need to spend a lot of time worrying about it. But for those that sadly do know about it, it is a very important thing to know about. Environmental, social governance, investment principles are a good and laudable goal for our society. But what's happened is that an advocacy campaign by extremists has misappropriated the E in that and turned it into a massive anti-fossil fuel divestment campaign, and it has real impacts. The senator mentioned it. I'm in board meetings multiple times a month where I see projects not get capital. We can't get insurance bids. We can't get money to fuel innovation. It is a huge problem, and it's a huge problem for all sectors. So what do you do about it? There's some legal things I could bore you about later on if you want to go to sleep, but what can states do about it? Well, your state looked at this issue hard. Your legislature did some things. I won't presume to talk about those details. I'm aware of them. With all respect to the leadership, they did what they could, and it's a consensus-building exercise, and I think they'll do more next time. Well, Texas, again, 7,000 bills get filed. Senate Bill 13, lucky 13, that's kind of funny. That's a big deal. When you label a bill that low, that means the leadership wants it to be a priority. They passed this bill, it's on the governor's desk, and it does three very important things. Thematically, it says if you are a company, an investment firm, an insurance company, if you are a governmental contractor, and you engage in anti-fossil fuel rhetoric and divestment campaign, we will not do business with you. I paused just so I could go back and tell the governor that got applause so he'll sign it quicker. Thank you for that. It's really important to understand that this isn't just symbolic. Listen, public pensions are on the line. In Texas, that's a big number, $300 billion worth of public pensions, right? You can leave a mark with this kind of law, right? North Dakota can leave a mark with this kind of law. But what you never want to do is say you can't invest in these types of companies. You just make the rule that you need to make sure they're getting better returns. Returns should control. Our public pensioners, our retired policemen and women, firemen and women, everybody who has put their time for the state and their local community or their municipal government and is relying upon a pension should be able to know that returns are the only thing that matters to the public investment. Okay? And what we see in the misappropriated ESG movement is a prioritization of agendas over returns. So it's, one of the quick talking points that always comes out against statutes like this or this idea is, oh, this is going to hurt the state economically. No. I don't think anybody ever accused Texas of not being greedy. I'll put it that way, right? So Texas isn't doing this because it wants to sacrifice the financial position of the state. It wants to ensure the financial position of the state by saying we are not going to let returns be downgraded to divestment agendas. And we are not going to accept pouring hundreds of billions of dollars of our pensions, our contracts, our accounts into entities that are explicitly fighting the men and women who make our economy and our state great. So that is real. It's a long bill. It's not just some talking point. It's not a coffee table book. It's not a cable news show presentation. It is law, and it is implemented, and the way it works is you make a list. You identify all the companies that do this stuff. And by the way, you also let the public tell you about it. In other words, the public can turn in a company for doing it. And then you scrutinize that list, and you actually assess, are they engaging in that kind of behavior, and are they involved with the state in some way? And then you give them the chance, I'll say it this way, to come to Jesus. You give them the chance to fix it. And if they don't, then they lose their right to do business in whatever setting. This is complicated. It affects how funds are managed and investments occur. There are exemptions that have to occur just because there's some things you can't touch. But this is a model of significance for every state in the country, and I know multiple states, including North Dakota, are studying this, and as people in this audience work every day in an industry that literally eradicates poverty worldwide, I want you to be proud of what you're doing, and I want you to know that your officials here and certainly back in Texas have your backs, and this is the kind of thing that can make a difference. So with that, I'm going to end and simply tell you, if you haven't already been to lifepowered.org, please do so. I'm a lawyer. I have a daily practice, but at night, when I don't have anything better to do, I help this research campaign because they spend their entire effort, and it's well-funded and well-researched and very substantive, playing in multiple states and in DC, to educate every American to raise their IQ, because we are convinced that if Americans just know more about energy, and I mean all kinds of energy, in an even-handed way, they will make better decisions about energy. And we don't have to tell them what to like or not. They will come to the right conclusions by just knowing more. So there's all kinds of great stuff on that website, including a bunch of great videos. There's going to be one coming out soon that will talk about North Dakota and Texas, so you'll enjoy that. They're animated. They're done by actual gamification animators, so it looks cool to kids and kids of all ages. So with that, I appreciate your time. I know you guys are a little bit behind schedule, so I'll close it down, and thank you for having me up here in North Dakota.
Wow, Mike Nasi, thank you very much. Thought-provoking. What a great presentation. This brings us to a break. I now welcome everybody to spend a little time networking, enjoy the exhibit hall, the outside exhibits, and we will all meet back here at 3 p.m. Thank you.